My name is Morgan Lawrence, and at 29, I never thought I would be standing outside my childhood home with a suitcase while my own parents changed the locks. The house that I secretly owned, the house that I had been paying the mortgage on for the last 5 years. All because my sister Stephanie needed a place for her wedding reception. Before I dive into how I got here, let me know where you all are watching from, drop a like and subscribe to hear how I turned this betrayal into my greatest triumph. Growing up in the Lawrence household meant understanding my place early on. As the firstborn, I quickly learned that responsibility was my middle name, while my younger sister Stephanie basked in the glow of being the family favorite. Our childhood home in suburban Boston was modest but comfortable, filled with countless memories both sweet and painful. From the beginning, our parents, Robert and Catherine Lawrence, had different expectations for us. When I brought home straight A's, my father would nod with approval and say, "That is what we expect from you, Morgan." But when Stephanie managed to scrape together a B-, after weeks of my tutoring her, our parents would celebrate by taking us all out for ice cream. Her accomplishments, no matter how small, were treated as monumental victories. I remember my 16th birthday when I asked for driving lessons. My parents told me I should save up for them myself because it would build character. A year later, when Stephanie turned 16, they surprised her with a used Honda Civic with a big red bow on top. When I pointed out the double standard, my mother simply said, "Your sister needs more support than you do. You have always been so independent." And independent I became. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school and college, saved every penny, and graduated with a business degree and minimal student debt. Meanwhile, Stephanie bounced between 3 different colleges, changing majors like seasons, with our parents footing the bill every step of the way. I discovered my passion for real estate during my senior year of college when I interned at a property management firm. There was something deeply satisfying about understanding property values, market trends, and the tangible nature of real estate investments. After graduation, I secured a position at a boutique real estate investment firm, where I met my mentor and eventual business partner, Daniel Rodriguez. Daniel saw potential in me that even I had not fully recognized. Under his guidance, I learned to take calculated risks and trust my instincts. By 24, I had made my first independent property investment, a small fixer-upper, that I renovated and sold for a modest but encouraging profit. Each success built upon the last, and within 3 years, I had established a respectable portfolio and reputation in the Boston real estate market. Then came the financial crisis that would change everything for our family. My father, who had worked for the same manufacturing company for 25 years, lost his job during a massive corporate downsizing. At 57, he found himself unemployed in an industry that was rapidly shrinking. My mother's part-time job at a local florist wasn't enough to cover their expenses, and their savings had been significantly depleted, helping Stephanie through her various academic endeavors. I discovered how dire the situation was during a rare Sunday dinner at the family home. I noticed past due notices poorly hidden beneath a stack of magazines and the forced cheerfulness in my mother's voice when she talked about cutting back on unnecessary expenses like her blood pressure medication. That night after dinner, I discreetly looked through some of the papers while helping my mother clear the table. What I found shocked me. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank had begun foreclosure proceedings. The home I had grown up in, the repository of all our family memories, was about to be lost. Without telling my parents, I contacted the bank the next day. After several negotiations, I arranged to purchase the home myself, paying off the outstanding debt and becoming the legal owner. The loan officer was surprised at my request to keep the transaction confidential from the current occupants, but there was nothing legally preventing this arrangement. I signed the papers on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, becoming the official owner of the Lawrence family home. That evening, I visited my parents with a story carefully constructed to protect my father's pride. I told them I had spoken with a friend at the bank who had helped arrange a refinancing of their mortgage with much more favorable terms. All they needed to do was sign some paperwork and their monthly payments would be reduced by more than half. The relief on their faces was worth every penny. My father hugged me awkwardly, something he rarely did, and my mother cried happy tears. They didn't read the fine print of the documents I provided, which essentially established them as tenants, while I took over the mortgage payments. All they knew was that their financial burden had been significantly lightened, and they could keep their home. For 5 years, this arrangement worked perfectly. I paid the mortgage, home insurance, and even covered major repairs, all while letting my parents believe they had simply lucked into an incredible refinancing deal during a market downturn. I didn't mind the expense or the deception. That house represented stability in a world that had proven unpredictable, and preserving it for my family seemed like the right thing to do. Little did I know that my generosity and discretion would ultimately lead to one of the most painful betrayals I would ever experience. The beginning of the end started on what should have been a pleasant spring evening. My parents had invited me for a special family dinner, insisting that I clear my schedule. "Your sister has wonderful news," my mother gushed over the phone, barely containing her excitement. I arrived at the family home with a bottle of champagne, assuming Stephanie had finally completed her most recent educational pursuit, a certificate in event planning that our parents had funded. The table was set with the good china, a rarity in our household, and my father was wearing a tie, which only happened on truly momentous occasions. Stephanie arrived last, as usual, bursting through the door with a squeal that could shatter glass. On her finger glittered a diamond ring that caught the light from every angle. Andrew Peterson, her boyfriend of 8 months, followed behind her with the self-satisfied smile of someone who had just made a significant purchase. "We are engaged," Stephanie announced, though the ring had already done most of the talking. My parents erupted in celebration, my mother crying and my father pumping Andrew's hand so vigorously I worried he might dislocate the poor man's shoulder. I offered genuine congratulations, even though I had my reservations about Andrew. He came from money, old Boston money, that afforded him a life of leisure punctuated by occasional dabbling in his family's investment firm. During the few times we had interacted, he had spoken to me with the condescending air of someone who believed a self-made success was inherently inferior to inherited wealth. Over dinner, Stephanie dominated the conversation with wedding plans already thoroughly developed, despite the ring being only days old. The ceremony would be at the Peterson family's church, followed by photographs in the public garden, and then a reception that would, according to her, make everyone in our social circle green with envy. "And speaking of the reception," Stephanie said, pausing dramatically as she reached for Andrew's hand, "we have decided that the perfect venue would be right here in this house, our family home." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Our modest family home, while charming, was hardly equipped to host what sounded like an extremely lavish reception. The living room, dining room, and backyard combined could comfortably hold perhaps 40 people, and from what Stephanie had described, their guest list was approaching 200. "Honey, that sounds wonderful," my mother said. "But the house is a bit small for such a grand affair, don't you think?" Stephanie waved away the concern. "Andrew and I already discussed that. We will need to do some renovations. Nothing major. Just knocking down the wall between the living room and your office, Dad expanding the back deck, maybe adding a temporary structure in the backyard. Oh, and landscaping, of course. The yard needs a complete overhaul." I glanced at my father, expecting him to express concern about the cost and disruption of such extensive renovations. Instead, he was nodding along enthusiastically. "Andrew's family has offered to cover all the costs," Stephanie continued. "They have connections with the best contractors in Boston. It will increase the property value, so it is really an investment in your future." "That is incredibly generous," I said carefully, feeling a growing unease. "But those are significant structural changes. Have you considered alternative venues that might be better suited for the size of event you are planning?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. "This is where Stephanie grew up," my mother said, her tone suggesting I had suggested something scandalous. "Of course she wants to celebrate her wedding here." "I am just thinking practically," I explained. Major renovations take time and are incredibly disruptive, and altering the structure of an older home like this one often uncovers additional issues that need addressing. Leave it to Morgan to rain on the parade. Stephanie sighed, her lower lip protruding slightly in a pout that had been effective since childhood. This is the biggest day of my life, and you immediately start looking for problems. I am not looking for problems, I defended. I am trying to prevent them. Have you even checked if permits would be required for this kind of work? Andrew's family handles all of that, she dismissed with a wave of her hand. Their contractor takes care of all the boring details. The conversation moved on, my concerns brushed aside as trivial compared to the excitement of wedding flowers and cake flavors. By the time dessert was served, the renovation plans had expanded to include a new kitchen because the caterers will need more modern appliances, and my childhood bedroom would be converted into a bridal suite for Stephanie to prepare on the big day. As I drove home that night, a knot formed in my stomach. Not only had I not been consulted about major changes to a house I legally owned, but my attempts to raise legitimate concerns had been dismissed as jealousy or negativity. I decided to wait a few days before approaching the subject again, hoping that with some time I could find a diplomatic way to address the situation. But the following week brought an escalation I hadn't anticipated. I stopped by the house after work to drop off some gardening supplies my mother had requested. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked outside. Inside, I found my mother, Stephanie, and a man with a measuring tape evaluating the wall between the living room and my father's office. Just imagine, Stephanie was saying, gesturing grandly. With this wall gone, the flow will be so much better, and we will replace these old hardwood floors with something more modern. I am thinking polished concrete. Polished concrete, I echoed, unable to hide my shock. The original hardwood floors were one of the home's most beautiful features, solid oak that had been meticulously maintained for decades. Stephanie turned, noticing me for the first time. Morgan, what a surprise. This is Antonio, the contractor Andrew's family works with. We are just getting some preliminary measurements. I see that, I said, struggling to maintain my composure. Mom, could I speak with you for a moment, privately? In the kitchen, I kept my voice low but couldn't hide my concern. When are these renovations supposed to start? And has anyone considered that Dad works from that office now that he is consulting from home? My mother's expression was a mixture of exasperation and dismissal. Your father is fine with relocating his office to the basement temporarily, and the work begins next month. The wedding is only 6 months away, so we need to move quickly. 6 months? That is hardly enough time for renovations of this scale, especially if permits are needed. Antonio assures us it will be fine, and Stephanie deserves to have her dream wedding, Morgan. I know it might be hard for you to understand since you are so focused on your career, but this is what families do for each other. They make sacrifices. Her words stung, implying that my concerns about practically demolishing my own property were somehow evidence that I didn't understand family sacrifice. I bit back a retort about who exactly had been making sacrifices for this family for years. That evening I called my father, hoping to appeal to his more practical nature. But he was equally enthusiastic about the renovation plans. It is a win-win, Morgan, he said cheerfully. We get an updated home, Stephanie gets her dream wedding venue, and it does not cost us a dime. Why are you so resistant to this? I wanted to tell him the truth then, that I was resistant because it was my house, my investment being altered without my consent. But I couldn't bring myself to shatter the illusion that had preserved his dignity for 5 years. Instead, I simply said I was concerned about the disruption to their lives, which he dismissed as unnecessary worry. The conflict escalated over the following weeks, as Stephanie's vision for her wedding venue became increasingly elaborate. What had started as knocking down one wall and expanding the deck had morphed into a near-complete overhaul of the first-floor extensive landscaping that included removing 3 mature oak trees from the backyard and plans to repaint the exterior of the house in colors that would complement her wedding palette. Each time I raised concerns, I was labeled as jealous, negative, or trying to ruin Stephanie's special day. The rift between us grew wider with each conversation, and I found myself being invited to the family home less and less frequently as the renovation plans progressed. The situation with my family's home renovations deteriorated faster than I could have imagined. 2 months after the initial announcement, I received a frantic call from my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who had lived next door to my parents for over 20 years. Morgan. Dear, there is a crew tearing up your parents' backyard right now. They have already cut down those beautiful oak trees your grandfather planted. I tried to speak with the workers, but they said they have authorization from the homeowners. I left work immediately and broke several speed limits getting to the house. When I arrived, the scene was even worse than Mrs. Jenkins had described. A team of workers was indeed tearing up the backyard, but they had gone beyond the trees. The stone pathway my father and I had laid one summer when I was 16 was being jackhammered into rubble. The rose bushes my mother had tenderly cultivated for decades had been ripped out and tossed into a debris pile. The small Japanese maple that had been my college graduation gift to my parents lay on its side roots exposed to the afternoon sun. I confronted the foreman who produced a work order signed by both my father and Andrew Peterson, authorizing a complete landscape redesign to accommodate a large reception tent and dance floor. When I explained that I was the actual property owner, he looked confused, but agreed to pause the work while I sorted things out with my family. Inside, I found my mother and Stephanie hunched over fabric swatches in the dining room discussing drapery options for the reception. What is going on out there? I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Who authorized destroying the entire backyard? My mother looked up, startled by my tone. Morgan, calm down. The backyard is being prepared for the wedding. We discussed this. We discussed renovations, not total destruction. Those trees were over 30 years old. Dad and Grandpa planted them together. Stephanie rolled her eyes, a gesture that made my blood boil. Trees can be replanted, Morgan. The backyard was outdated and not at all suitable for an elegant reception. Andrew's family is paying for everything to be redone with professional landscaping. It will look so much better when it is finished. Better for whom? For your one-day event. What about the next 20 years that Mom and Dad will be looking at whatever trendy landscaping you are putting in? We like the new design, my mother interjected firmly. And frankly, Morgan, I do not understand why you are so upset. This is not your house. The irony of her statement hit me like a physical blow. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain some semblance of calm. The workers mentioned they will need permits for some of the changes they are making. Has anyone looked into that? Antonio is handling all of that, Stephanie said dismissively. Now, if you are done throwing a tantrum, we need to get back to these fabric selections. The decorator needs our decision by tomorrow. I left without another word, knowing that any further discussion would only escalate the situation. Instead, I drove directly to the city planning office to inquire about any permits that had been filed for the property. As I suspected, no permits had been submitted, which meant the current work was being done illegally. That evening, I received a call from my father. His voice was tight with anger, something I rarely heard directed at me. Antonio's crew had to stop work today because someone reported them to the city for not having proper permits, he said without preamble. Would you happen to know anything about that? I hadn't reported them, though I had considered it. I went to the planning office to check if permits had been filed, Dad. That is all. If someone reported them, it wasn't me. This delay could set back the entire renovation schedule, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. Stephanie is beside herself with worry that her wedding venue won't be ready in time. Maybe that is a sign that you should consider an actual event venue instead of trying to transform our family home into something it was never meant to be, I suggested. Our family home, he emphasized. That is what this is about, isn't it? You have always been jealous of the attention Stephanie receives. Even as a child, you would act out when the focus wasn't on you. His revision of history was so blatant that it momentarily left me speechless. I had never been the child seeking attention. That role had been firmly occupied by Stephanie from day one. Dad, that is not what is happening here. I am concerned about illegal renovations that could affect the structural integrity and value of the house. The value of the house, he repeated slowly. Always the businesswoman, aren't you, Morgan? Always calculating the bottom line, while the rest of us focus on what really matters, family. His words cut deep, especially coming from the man whose financial security I had quietly ensured for years. That is unfair, and you know it, I said quietly. What I know, he replied, his voice cold, is that your sister is planning the most important day of her life, and instead of supporting her, you are creating obstacles at every turn. Your mother and I have always known you were different, Morgan. More distant, more focused on your own path than on being part of this family. But we never thought you would actively try to sabotage your sister's happiness. After we hung up, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, too shaken to drive. The conversation had revealed something I had always suspected but never wanted to confirm in my parents' eyes. My independence and self-reliance were not virtues, but proof of some emotional deficiency. 2 days later, I was working late at the office when I overheard a conversation that would haunt me for weeks. I had stepped out to grab coffee from the break room and paused when I heard my name mentioned during what I thought was a private call between my parents on speakerphone. Morgan has always been this way, my mother was saying, her voice tinny through the phone. Even as a child, she was so difficult. Remember how she would insist on doing everything herself, never wanting help. My father laughed, but there was little humor in it. Stubborn as a mule. I used to think it was admirable, her independence. Now I see it for what it was. She has always had trouble connecting, showing warmth. Stephanie at least knows how to appreciate what family does for her, my mother agreed. Morgan takes everything for granted. After all we have sacrificed for her education, her opportunities, she cannot even be happy for her sister's wedding. I backed away silently, my coffee forgotten. Their words replayed in my head throughout the evening like a cruel taunt. All those years I had worked multiple jobs to put myself through college while they paid Stephanie's full tuition. All the times I had quietly handled family emergencies while Stephanie created them. All the money I had poured into maintaining their home while they remained blissfully unaware. And in their eyes, I was the cold, ungrateful daughter. The next day I attempted one last time to connect emotionally with my father. I invited him to lunch at his favorite diner, deliberately choosing a neutral location away from the house and the wedding planning chaos. Dad, I said after we had ordered, I want you to know that I'm happy for Stephanie. I want her wedding to be beautiful. I just have concerns about how it is being handled. He sighed, spreading jam on his toast with methodical precision. Morgan, when you have children of your own someday, you will understand that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for their happiness. Your mother and I are willing to endure some inconvenience to give Stephanie the wedding of her dreams. But at what cost? The changes being made are significant and permanent, and there are legitimate concerns about doing it properly with permits and proper planning. Antonio has assured us everything will be fine, he said with a finality that suggested the topic was closed. And if it isn't, if there are issues with the city or problems with the house down the line, he put down his toast and looked at me directly. Then we will deal with it as a family. A concept that seems increasingly foreign to you, Morgan. I had hoped becoming successful would soften some of your harder edges, but if anything, it has made you more rigid, more focused on rules and regulations than on what matters. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to expose how deeply his words wounded me. What matters to me is your well-being, yours and Mom's. That house is your security, your retirement asset. He chuckled patronizingly. Now you are concerned about our retirement. The house is paid for, Morgan. It is the one thing we do not have to worry about thanks to that refinancing deal years ago. If anything, these renovations will only increase its value. The lunch ended with little resolved, and I drove away feeling even more isolated from my family than before. Over the next few weeks, the renovations continued at a breakneck pace. Walls came down, floors were torn up, and the backyard was transformed into an unrecognizable construction zone. Each time I visited another piece of the home, I remembered had been erased to make way for Stephanie's vision. Meanwhile, Stephanie herself began to take over more and more physical space within the house. What started as wedding planning materials spread across the dining room table soon expanded to her personal items migrating from her apartment into various rooms. Her clothes appeared in closets, her toiletries in bathrooms, and her photographs replaced family pictures on walls. When I asked my mother about it, she explained that Stephanie and Andrew were between leases and staying in the house temporarily until they found a new place. That temporary arrangement showed no signs of ending as the wedding date approached. During one visit, I discovered that several boxes of my childhood memorabilia, which had been stored in the attic, had been moved to the garage without my knowledge or consent. When I found them, many items were water damaged from a leak in the garage roof. My high school yearbook's artwork and journals were ruined while Stephanie's possessions had been carefully preserved in plastic containers in the attic. It was becoming increasingly clear that I was being erased from the family home my presence and history minimized to make room for the golden child and her grand plans. With each visit, I felt less like a daughter returning home and more like an unwelcome intruder in a space that ironically legally belonged to me. The final breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon when I decided to stop by the house to collect some important tax documents I had stored in my old bedroom, which I still used as a home office when working remotely. I had called ahead to let my mother know I was coming but received no answer. Assuming she was out running wedding errands with Stephanie, I used my key and entered. The first sign that something was wrong was the stack of cardboard boxes in the entryway labeled Morgan's Things. Puzzled, I moved deeper into the house and was stopped cold by what I saw. My former bedroom, which had maintained at least some semblance of my personality through a desk and bookshelf I still used, was being completely dismantled. The desk where I kept important documents was pulled apart with drawers removed and contents piled haphazardly in boxes. The built-in bookshelves my grandfather had crafted were being unscrewed from the walls. In the center of this chaos stood Stephanie directing two workers while holding swatches of pale pink fabric. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice barely controlled. Stephanie spun around, her surprise quickly morphing into annoyance. "Morgan, Mom said you weren't coming until later. We are converting the room into my bridal suite, remember? You said you were converting it the week of the wedding, not 2 months before. And where are my things? I had important documents in that desk." She gestured vaguely toward the boxes in the hallway. "We packed everything up for you. It is all there." I rushed to the boxes and began frantically searching through them. Papers were shoved in with no organization folders emptied and mixed together. Client contracts, property deeds, financial statements, all jumbled in a chaotic mess. The careful filing system I had maintained was completely destroyed. "These are confidential business documents," I said, my voice rising with each word. "You cannot just toss them in boxes like old clothes." "Calm down," Stephanie said, rolling her eyes. "They are just papers. You can reorganize them. We needed to get started on this room now because the custom furniture for the bridal suite is being delivered next week." I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. "Where are Mom and Dad? I need to talk to them about this." "Dad is at a doctor's appointment and Mom is picking out centerpieces with Andrew's mother. They knew we were working on this room today." Something in me snapped. After months of having my concerns dismissed, my property altered without permission, and my very presence in the family home diminished this final invasion of my private space and business documents was too much. "This stops now," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I want these workers out of my room immediately." Stephanie laughed, a short dismissive sound that ignited my anger further. "It is not your room anymore, Morgan. You have your own place. This is going to be my bridal suite, and after the wedding we are converting it to a proper guest room. Mom and Dad already agreed." "I don't care what Mom and Dad agreed to. This is legally my house and I did not authorize any of these renovations." There was a moment of stunned silence before Stephanie burst into laughter again, this time with genuine amusement. Your house? What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? 5 years ago, when Dad lost his job and they were facing foreclosure, I purchased this house. I paid off their mortgage. I have been paying the property taxes and insurance ever since. I am the legal owner of this house, and I have allowed Mom and Dad to live here because I care about them. But this, I gestured to the destruction around me. This stops now. Her amusement faded, replaced by uncertainty, and then hardening into anger. You are lying. Mom and Dad refinanced the mortgage. They told me all about it. That is what I let them believe to spare Dad's pride. But I have the deed and all the documentation to prove ownership. The workers had stopped their dismantling and were awkwardly looking between us, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding. You guys can leave, Stephanie snapped at them. We will call you when we sort this out. After they left, Stephanie pulled out her phone. I am calling Mom and Dad. They need to hear these ridiculous claims you are making. 30 minutes later, my parents rushed into the house, faces flushed with a mixture of concern and anger. Stephanie had apparently given them a hysterical version of my claims during her call. Morgan, my father began, his tone patronizing. Stephanie tells us you are claiming to own our house. I do not know what kind of stress you are under at work, but this is concerning behavior. I walked to my car and returned with a folder containing copies of the deed, mortgage paperwork, tax payments, and insurance policies, all in my name. I spread them across the dining room table, the evidence of my 5-year deception laid bare. I didn't want to tell you, I explained as they stared at the documents in disbelief. I knew how hard it was for you when you lost your job, Dad. I wanted to help without making you feel like you had failed somehow. My mother was the first to react, her face flushing with anger rather than gratitude. So all this time we have been living in your house like some kind of charity case. No, that is not how I saw it at all. You are my parents. I wanted to help to make sure you didn't lose your home. By lying to us, by letting us believe we were still homeowners, when really we were what your tenants— My father's voice was cold with fury. I never thought of it that way, I protested. It was still your home. I just took over the financial responsibility. And now you are using that to control what we do with the house, Stephanie interjected, tears streaming down her face. You waited until my wedding plans were underway to spring this on us. You are trying to ruin everything because you are jealous. That is not true, I said, feeling increasingly desperate as the three of them united against me. I only brought this up because you started making major changes to the property without even consulting me. Knocking down walls, tearing up floors, removing trees, dismantling my workspace, all without a single conversation with the person who actually owns the house. So that is what this is really about, my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. Control. You purchased this house secretly so you could hold it over our heads whenever you wanted. No, I did it to help you to keep the family home. If I had wanted control, I would have told you years ago that I was the owner. But they weren't listening anymore. My mother was crying, my father was pacing angrily, and Stephanie was on the phone with Andrew recounting my betrayal in dramatic terms. I think you should leave, my father finally said, standing between me and the stairs that led to my dismantled office. Until you come to your senses and realize what family truly means. Dad, please let me at least collect my documents. There are contracts and client information in those boxes that I need for work. We will pack everything properly and have it delivered to your apartment, my mother said stiffly. Right now, I think it is best if you go. I looked from one family member to the other, searching for any sign of understanding or gratitude for the sacrifices I had made for years. There was none. In their eyes, I was the villain who had deceived them and was now threatening Stephanie's perfect wedding out of spite. As I walked toward the door, Stephanie's tearful voice followed me. How could you do this to me? This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life. I paused at the door, turning to look at my family one last time. I never wanted it to come to this. I just wanted you to respect that this house belongs to all of us, including me." "No, Morgan," my father said coldly. "You made it very clear that this house belongs to you alone. Now please leave before this gets any worse." I walked out with only my purse and car keys, leaving behind boxes of my personal and professional documents, along with any illusion that my years of financial support had earned me a place of respect in my family. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw my father on the phone gesturing angrily. By the time I reached the end of the block, I received a text message from my mother. "We are changing the locks. Do not come back until you are ready to apologize to your sister and support her wedding properly." Sitting in my car at a nearby park, the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. I had been kicked out of a house that I legally owned by the very people I had been quietly supporting for years. All because I had dared to question the golden child's wedding plans. I called the one person I knew would understand my friend Jessica Barnes, and through tears explained the situation. Her immediate response was both comforting and practical. "Come to my place right now. You are staying with me tonight, and tomorrow, we are calling your lawyer." I spent that night on Jessica's couch, alternating between bouts of sobbing and stunned silence. She sat with me through it all, offering tissues, ice cream, and eventually a glass of wine when it became clear that sleep would be elusive. "I just cannot believe they reacted that way," I said, staring blankly at the ceiling. "I have been paying the mortgage on that house for 5 years. I have covered every major repair from the new roof to the furnace replacement last winter. And instead of a thank you, I get thrown out." Jessica squeezed my hand. "Because you threatened the status quo. You challenged the family narrative where Stephanie is the star, and you are the supporting character." Her insight hit home. My entire life I had played the role assigned to me, the responsible, self-sufficient daughter who needed nothing and expected nothing. By asserting my legal rights to the house, I had stepped out of that role, and my family's response had been swift and severe. "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked, the question directed as much to myself as to Jessica. "I could legally evict them. The house is mine." "You could," she agreed. "But is that really what you want?" I thought about it for a long moment. "No, despite everything, they are still my family. I do not want to destroy our relationship completely, but I cannot just let them walk all over me either." "Then you need to think strategically," Jessica said. "This is not just an emotional situation. It is a legal one, too. You need professional advice." The next morning, still wearing yesterday's clothes and fighting a headache from too much wine and too little sleep, I called Richard Wilson, the real estate attorney who had handled my purchase of the family home 5 years earlier. "Of course I remember that transaction," he said after I explained the current situation. "It was unusual but perfectly legal. And yes, you are absolutely within your rights to evict your family if you choose to. They have been living there as tenants at will, essentially." "I do not want to evict them," I clarified. "At least not permanently. I just want them to acknowledge that the house is mine and to stop making unauthorized changes to it." "That is reasonable," Richard agreed. "However, given the emotional nature of this situation, I would recommend a formal approach. We can send an official letter outlining your ownership and specifying what changes require your approval. Sometimes seeing it on legal letterhead makes people take it more seriously." After our call, I headed to my apartment to shower and change before going to the office. I had barely stepped through my door when my phone rang. It was Daniel Rodriguez, my business partner. "Morgan, where are you? Your sister just called the office looking for you. She sounded upset." I groaned. "It is a long story, Daniel. Family drama erupting into a full-blown crisis." "Well, whatever it is, she mentioned something about documents and client contracts being held hostage. Should I be concerned?" My heart sank. The boxes of paperwork that had been haphazardly packed up included sensitive client information and contracts for several ongoing projects. While most of our work was digital, I maintained hard copies of certain documents in my home office. "They packed up my home office without warning," I explained. "All my files are jumbled in boxes at their house, and they changed the lock so I cannot get them." Daniel was silent for a moment. This sounds serious, Morgan. We need those documents back ASAP. Some of those contracts contain confidentiality clauses that could put us at legal risk if they are not properly secured. The professional implications of my family situation suddenly came into sharp focus. This wasn't just about hurt feelings and wedding drama anymore. My career and business reputation were now at stake. I will handle it, I promised Daniel. Just give me a day to sort this out. After ending the call, I sat at my kitchen table, my initial grief and shock hardening into resolve. My family had not only rejected my years of financial support and thrown me out of my own property, but they were now potentially jeopardizing my professional standing as well. Over the next few days, I moved between emotional exhaustion and strategic planning. Richard drafted a formal letter asserting my ownership of the property and requesting the immediate return of my business documents. When delivered, the letter was returned unopened with refused, written across the envelope in my father's handwriting. My calls went unanswered. My emails were ignored. Even a carefully worded text to my mother expressing concern about confidential client information received only a curt response. "We are busy with wedding preparations. Your things are safe in the garage." The garage that leaked every time it rained. The garage where I had already found water-damaged boxes of my childhood mementos. Jessica, who had become my emotional rock through this ordeal, finally posed the question I had been avoiding. What would you do if these were not your parents, but regular tenants who were damaging your property and refusing to communicate? I would take legal action, I admitted. Then maybe that is what you need to do here. Not to hurt them, but to protect yourself and your business. I spent a sleepless night weighing my options. By morning, I had reached a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I would assert my legal rights as the property owner, but I would also offer a compromise that could potentially salvage both the wedding and our family relationships. I called Daniel to discuss a business idea that had been forming in my mind. Our company had recently purchased a beautiful historic property on the outskirts of Boston, intending to renovate it as luxury apartments. The renovation hadn't yet begun, and the property included expansive gardens and a carriage house that had been converted into an event space by the previous owners. What if we offered my sister the carriage house for her wedding reception? I proposed. It is much more suitable for a large event. It is already set up with proper facilities, and it would not require destructive renovations to my parents' home. Daniel was intrigued by the idea. The property is just sitting there until we start renovations next year. Using it for a wedding could actually be good publicity for the eventual apartments. Plus, it would solve your family crisis. With Daniel's approval, I had my first piece of leverage. Now I needed to present it in a way that my family would accept, rather than view as another attempt to control the situation. I need to approach this as a business negotiation, not a family argument, I told Jessica that evening. Clear terms, professional presentation, and a solution that benefits everyone. And if they still refuse, she asked. I squared my shoulders, finding a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. Then I proceed with legal remedies to protect my property and my business. Family is important, but not at the expense of my self-respect or professional obligations. 2 weeks after being kicked out of my own house, I returned with Richard Wilson and a detailed proposal. As expected, my arrival was met with hostility. "What is he doing here?" my father demanded, eyeing Richard suspiciously as we stood on the front porch. "Mr. Wilson is my attorney," I explained calmly. "He helped me purchase this house 5 years ago, and he is here to help clarify the legal situation. May we come in?" Reluctantly, my father stepped aside. In the living room, my mother and Stephanie sat side by side on the sofa, a united front of disapproval. Andrew stood behind them, his hand possessively on Stephanie's shoulder. Richard began by laying out the legal facts in clear, unemotional terms. He presented the deed, property tax receipts, insurance policies, and records of every major repair I had funded over the years. The evidence was irrefutable. I was the legal owner of the house and had been financially supporting my parents while allowing them to believe they still owned their home. "So what now?" my father asked bitterly when Richard finished. You are going to evict us from our home of 30 years because Stephanie wanted to have her wedding reception here. No, I said firmly. That is not what I want at all. What I want is for my family to acknowledge what I have done for you all these years to respect my property rights and to work with me on a solution that honors both Stephanie's wedding dreams and my investment in this house. I opened my laptop and pulled up images of the carriage house property. This is part of a historic estate that my company recently acquired. It has a beautiful event space that can accommodate twice the number of guests you are planning for. It has professional kitchen facilities for caterers, ample parking, and gardens for photographs. Stephanie leaned forward despite herself clearly intrigued by the pictures. It is beautiful, she admitted grudgingly. It is yours if you want it, I said. No charge. My company is offering it as the wedding venue, which would allow you to have the elaborate reception you've planned without destroying the family home in the process. And what do you want in exchange? Andrew asked suspiciously. He had been notably silent until now. 3 things. First, the immediate return of all my business documents properly packed and handled. Second, a halt to all structural renovations on this house, though cosmetic updates like paint and fixtures are fine. And third, an acknowledgement from all of you that I am the legal owner of this property and have been supporting this family financially for years. My mother's face flushed with anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell which. So you want us to grovel in gratitude because you went behind our backs and bought our house without telling us? Not grovel, I said quietly. Just acknowledge the truth. I did not buy your house to control you or to hold it over your heads. I did it because I love you and I could not bear to see you lose your home. All these years I have asked for nothing in return. But I cannot continue to be treated as an outsider in a house that I own and maintain. Stephanie was still studying the pictures of the carriage house, her expression softening. This place really is perfect for the reception, and we would not have to worry about space constraints or neighbor complaints about noise. Andrew nodded in agreement. My parents would be impressed. It has a much more elegant ambiance than a backyard wedding. My father looked between them in disbelief. Are you both seriously considering this? After everything Morgan has done? What exactly has Morgan done, Dad? Stephanie asked, surprising me with her sudden shift. Purchased the house when we were about to lose it, paid for a new roof and furnace. Let us live here, rent-free for 5 years. I'm not saying her secrecy was right, but looking at all these documents, it seems like we are the ones who have been taking advantage of her. Her words hung in the air, the first acknowledgement from any family member that my actions had been born of generosity rather than control. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We were so proud when we thought we had managed to refinance the house ourselves. It felt like we had solved our own problems. I know, I said gently. That is why I kept it a secret. I never wanted to take that dignity from you. But I also never expected to be treated like an intruder in a house that I've been paying for all these years. There was a long silence as my family absorbed the reality of the situation. Finally, my father spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I suppose we owe you an apology, Morgan, and a thank you that is long overdue. It wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was a start. Over the next hour, we negotiated terms that everyone could accept. Stephanie and Andrew would have their reception at the carriage house, which offered a far more suitable venue for their event. My business documents would be returned immediately. The unauthorized renovations to the family home would stop, though some of the cosmetic updates would remain. Most importantly, we began the painful but necessary conversation about the family dynamics that had led to this situation. My parents reluctantly acknowledged the pattern of favoritism that had shaped our family for decades. Stephanie, to her credit, admitted that she had taken advantage of being the baby of the family to avoid responsibilities that had always fallen to me. We were far from healed, but as I left that day with Richard, I felt the first glimmer of hope that our family might eventually find a healthier balance. Not because I had asserted my legal rights, though that had been necessary, but because we had finally broken through the facade of family myths to see each other more clearly. Stephanie's wedding took place 6 months later at the historic property my company had acquired. The carriage house had been transformed into an elegant reception venue that far exceeded what could have been accomplished at the family home. The gardens, with their mature trees and carefully tended flower beds, provided a stunning backdrop for photographs that no amount of hasty landscaping could have matched. Standing in the carefully preserved architecture of the carriage house, watching my sister dance with her new husband under crystal chandeliers, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was pride in having provided this beautiful space, satisfaction in having protected both my business interests and the family home, but also a lingering sadness for the years of misunderstanding that had led to our family crisis. "You did a good thing here," Jessica whispered, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to me. "This is 10 times better than what they could have done at the house." I nodded, taking a sip. "It worked out for everyone. The company gets some great publicity for the property, Stephanie gets her dream venue, and the house remains structurally intact. And most importantly, your family is starting to recognize your value," Jessica added, nodding toward my parents who were making their way through the crowd toward me. The healing process with my family had been neither quick nor easy. After the initial confrontation and compromise, we had engaged in a series of difficult conversations facilitated by a family therapist. Years of unspoken resentments, misunderstandings, and patterns of favoritism had been painfully brought to light. There had been tears, angry words, and moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. But gradually, painfully, we had begun to establish a new family dynamic based on honesty rather than comfortable illusions. My parents had struggled the most with recognizing how their different treatment of their daughters had affected us both. My father particularly had found it difficult to accept that his independent daughter had been silently supporting the family while he remained blissfully unaware. "Morgan," my mother said, reaching us with my father just behind her, "everything looks beautiful. I cannot believe how you transformed this place." "The event planner did most of the work," I demurred. "I just provided the venue." "You did more than that," my father said gruffly. "You saved the day, just like you have been saving this family for years without any of us noticing." It was the most direct acknowledgement he had made of my long-term financial support, and I felt a knot in my throat at his words. "That is what family does," I said, echoing the phrase that had been used against me months earlier, but infusing it with genuine warmth. My mother squeezed my hand. "We are still learning what that really means, all of us." She glanced meaningfully across the room to where Stephanie was approaching, momentarily separated from the constant attention of well-wishers. My sister's relationship with me had undergone perhaps the most surprising evolution since our confrontation. Once the initial shock and anger had subsided, she had been the first family member to offer a genuine apology. "I never really saw you," she had admitted during one of our therapy sessions. "You were always so capable, so put together. It was easier to think of you as cold and distant than to acknowledge that you were carrying all of us while I just took and took." Stephanie reached our small group, radiant in her wedding gown. Without a word, she pulled me into a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for this amazing venue, but for forcing us all to finally grow up and see each other clearly." As she pulled back, I saw tears glistening in her eyes. "I have been a terrible sister for most of our lives. I promise I am working on becoming someone worthy of what you have done for our family." Her words, so sincere and free of the manipulation that had characterized many of our past interactions, marked a turning point I had not dared to hope for. Perhaps the family crisis had been necessary, a painful but essential disruption of patterns too entrenched to be addressed any other way. In the months following the wedding, our family continued the difficult work of rebuilding relationships on more honest foundations. My parents struggled with the realization that their retirement security was largely dependent on my financial support, a fact that challenged my father's sense of identity as the family provider. After much discussion, we reached a new arrangement, I would transfer ownership of the house to them as a gift with the understanding that any major decisions about the property would be made collectively. This solution restored their dignity as homeowners, while acknowledging my significant investment and ensuring I would have a voice in future decisions. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was one we could all live with. The experience also prompted me to reflect on my own role in the family dysfunction. My silence about purchasing the house, while well-intentioned, had enabled unhealthy patterns to continue. By trying to protect my father's pride, I had allowed my own contributions to go unacknowledged, building resentment that eventually exploded in crisis. This realization inspired a new direction in my professional life as well. Working with Daniel, I established a foundation focused on helping families in financial crisis keep their homes through education counseling and, in some cases, direct assistance. We created programs specifically designed to address the complex emotional and psychological aspects of financial hardship, not just the practical ones. I never want another family to go through what we did. I explained to a reporter covering the foundation's launch. Financial crises do not just threaten people's homes. They can tear families apart, if not handled with both practical solutions and emotional intelligence. The foundation became an unexpected source of healing for our family. My father, with his experience in manufacturing management, joined as an advisor for families facing job loss in traditional industries. My mother contributed her organizational skills to coordinating volunteers. Even Stephanie, with her newly developed sense of responsibility, offered her event planning expertise for fundraising galas. Working together toward a common goal that honored both my financial acumen and our shared values helped bridge the remaining gaps between us. It did not erase the past, but it created a new context for our family relationships, one based on mutual respect rather than established roles and expectations. On the one-year anniversary of the confrontation that had nearly torn our family apart, we gathered for dinner at the house that had been at the center of the conflict. The renovations had been scaled back to necessary updates, rather than structural overhauls, preserving the character of the home while refreshing its appearance. As we sat around the dining table that had witnessed so many family dramas over the years, my father raised his glass in a toast. "To Morgan," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who showed us that true family strength isn't about preserving comfortable illusions, but about facing difficult truths together." My mother and Stephanie raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment with genuine warmth that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. In that moment, I realized that being kicked out of my own house had been paradoxically one of the best things that could have happened to our family. The crisis had forced us all to confront the unhealthy dynamics we'd been sustaining for decades. The pain had been necessary for genuine growth and healing. As I looked around the table at the family that had hurt me deeply, but was now working sincerely to build something healthier, I felt a sense of peace that no legal victory could have provided. We were not perfect, and we never would be, but we were finally seeing each other clearly, acknowledging both strengths and weaknesses, and choosing to love each other authentically, rather than performing roles assigned long ago. That, I realized, was the true meaning of home. Not the physical structure I had purchased to keep my family secure, but the honest, imperfect connections we were finally building with each other. Have you ever experienced a painful betrayal that ultimately led to positive change in your life? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most difficult moments become unexpected turning points that lead to growth and healing. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences.